The Right Honorable Sir John A. Macdonald, PC GCB QC, generally known as Sir John A., was a Canadian lawyer and politician who served as the first Prime Minister of Canada from 1878 to 1891. He also served as Premier of the Province of Canada from 1864 to 1867. A member of the Conservative Party, Macdonald was one of the leading figures in Canadian Confederation and is regarded as the founding father of Canada. Macdonald was born in Glasgow, Scotland, and moved with his family to Upper Canada in 1820. After studying law, he began practicing in Kingston in 1834. During the 1830s, he became involved in politics, advocating for responsible government, which would grant legislative powers to an elected assembly responsible to the people rather than the British government. He was elected to the Legislative Assembly of Upper Canada in 1843 and 1847, representing Kingston. In 1848, he joined the coalition government of the Province of Canada, headed by Sir Allan MacNab as Attorney General. In 1856, Macdonald became Premier of the Province of Canada, but his government was defeated in the following election. In 1864, he formed a new government in coalition with the Liberals under George Brown, and they were victorious at the polls. However, in 1867, the coalition broke down and Macdonald resigned. Confederation was achieved later that year, and Macdonald was appointed Prime Minister of the new Dominion of Canada. Under his leadership, the country grew significantly. The Canadian Pacific Railway was completed, the Northwest Territories and British Columbia were added to the Dominion, and Canada became a world leader in the development of transcontinental transportation routes. At home, Macdonald introduced measures to protect the French language and culture. Despite this, relations between the two founding races were strained throughout his tenure due to debates over representation by population and the use of the province's additional seats in the Senate as bargaining chips in coalition governments. Though popular in English Canada, Macdonald faced growing opposition from French Canadians who felt alienated by his policies and accused him of presiding over a government that was hostile to their interests. In 1873, he was defeated in an election and went into opposition until 1878 when he returned to power. He continued his policy of promoting the interests of settlers in Western Canada, and the railway was completed in 1885. In 1887, he was involved in the creation of the National Policy, which imposed high tariffs on manufactured goods in order to foster industrialization within Canada. His fourth and final term in office was dominated by the debate over the Manitoba schools question, which arose from Manitoba's decision to establish separate schools for Catholics and Protestants. This debate resulted in the first major defeat of the Macdonald government, which then fell apart amid allegations of corruption. Though Macdonald himself was cleared of wrongdoing, he suffered a stroke and retired from politics. He died in 1891. His legacy remains controversial. Macdonald is celebrated as the founding father of Canada, and many places and institutions are named in his honor. However, his handling of relations with the Indigenous peoples was disastrous. In particular, he oversaw the last major effort to forcibly assimilate Indigenous children through the residential school system. Early life and career. John Alexander Macdonald was born in Glasgow, Scotland on January 1815. His father, James Macdonald, was a poor hatter who had been driven out of business by competition. In 1820, James decided to immigrate to Upper Canada with his wife and 4 children, including John. They settled in a small cabin near the town of Kingston. Young John attended a common school during the winter months and helped his father on the farm during the rest of the year. In his spare time, he hunted and fished with the local boys and learned to shoot. At age 15, Macdonald ran away to join the British Army and served briefly as a private in the 84th Regiment before being sent back to his father with a dishonorable discharge. Macdonald studied law at the time. Legal education in Upper Canada was entirely unregulated. A prospective lawyer simply served an apprenticeship under a practicing barrister. While working for a law firm in Kingston, Macdonald lived with the family of John George. Cox, whose daughter Isabella he eventually married. Political activism. After being called to the bar in 1834, Macdonald began practicing law in Kingston, where he established a reputation as an able and ambitious young lawyer. He soon became interested in politics and in 1837 joined the local chapter of the Sons of Freedom, a secret society dedicated to ending British rule in North America. When the group planned an armed rebellion against the government of Upper Canada in 1837, however, Macdonald refused to join them, believing that the timing was not right for a revolution. Instead, he used his legal skills to defend those who did rebel. During the Rising, Macdonald's house was attacked and destroyed by Colonel D. Patton, who blamed Macdonald for inciting the revolt. As compensation, the government paid Macdonald £150 for his destroyed property and £100 for his legal expenses. Although he did not participate in the rebellion, Macdonald gained a great deal of popularity because of his defense of those who did. He was consequently elected to the Legislative Assembly of Upper Canada in 1843 and 1847, representing Kingston. In 1848, Sir Allan MacNab, leader of the government of the province of Canada, asked Macdonald to join his cabinet as Attorney General. Macdonald accepted, becoming the first person of Scottish descent to serve in a Canadian cabinet. Throughout the 1850s, Macdonald remained loyal to MacNab, continuing to serve in various cabinet positions, even after the latter had lost the confidence of the Assembly. In 1856, MacNab resigned, and Macdonald succeeded him as Premier of the province of Canada. Macdonald's government was defeated in the next election, and he spent the next 8 years in opposition. During this period, the Legislative Assembly passed the controversial Durham Act, which abolished the province's elected counties and replaced them with appointed districts, giving more voting power to rural voters. Although the act was officially non-partisan, the Liberals were able to take advantage of the changes and won a majority in the next election. After serving just 6 weeks in office, Macdonald found himself in the unusual position of a premier of the province in opposition. In 1863, Macdonald and the leaders of the other opposition parties met secretly with Sir John A. Walsh, the lieutenant governor, to complain about the situation. Walsh supported their cause and invited them to form a government. Macdonald agreed, and on May 1864, he took office as head of a coalition government made up of Conservatives, Liberals, and the remnants of the Old Rouge or Clear-Cut Party. George Brown, a Liberal, was appointed to the key post of Attorney General. Confederation, and early political career. In 1866, Macdonald's government approved the Charlottetown and Quebec conferences, which brought together delegates from the governments of the province of Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick to discuss the idea of political union. These meetings led to the creation of the Act of Canadian Confederation, which united the provinces of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and the province of Canada, which was itself divided along linguistic and cultural lines into the provinces of Ontario and Quebec. Macdonald played an important role in achieving confederation, although his intentions were somewhat different from those of the other delegates. Unlike the delegates from the maritime provinces who wanted closer ties with the United Kingdom and feared that U.S. expansionism would engulf their territory if they were left alone, Macdonald hoped that Confederation would make it easier to expand Canadian territory westward. For him, Confederation meant that Canada would be strong enough to stand on its own. On July 1, 1867, the new Dominion of Canada was created, and Macdonald was appointed Prime Minister. As Prime Minister, Macdonald's goal was to turn Canada into a nation of farmers and businessmen. He promoted the settlement of the West, financed railway construction, raised tariffs to promote manufacturing and mining, and appointed supporters to influential positions in the civil service. The Conservatives won the first 2 elections held under the new Dominion system in 1867 and 1872, but the party's success bred factionalism, and in 1873, Macdonald's government was defeated by a coalition of Liberals and former coalition partners. Out of power again, Macdonald led his party into the wilderness years, a period in which the Conservatives reorganized themselves and prepared for a comeback. During the 1870s, Macdonald crisscrossed Canada raising funds and building a party organization. He created the elaborate patronage brokerage system that distributed jobs and contracts in return for votes and campaign contributions. In 1878, the Liberals split over the issue of the budget, and Macdonald was able to capitalize on the ensuing confusion to win the election. He returned to office in 1878 and remained Prime Minister until his death in 1891, making him Canada's longest-serving Prime Minister to date. Later, political career and legacy. During his second term in office, Macdonald continued his policy of promoting the interests of settlers in Western Canada. The completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1885 opened up Western Canada to settlement, and the area rapidly developed. Although this region was initially acquired largely for the purpose of creating a railway route to the Pacific, it quickly became an important part of the Canadian economy. The natural resources of the region, especially its fertile farmlands, attracted settlers from all over the world. By the end of the century, Western Canada had become one of the most productive agricultural regions in the world. Despite this progress, relations between the two founding races were strained. In 1886, the Marchand government attempted to impose a quota on the number of Catholic children who could attend state-funded schools in Manitoba, leading to the famous Manitoba Schools Question. Tensions rose over the following decade as the question wound its way through the courts. Eventually, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in 1890 that provincial legislation establishing separate schools for Catholics was constitutional. When Macdonald became Prime Minister again in 1878, the country's tariff policy was based on the recommendations of the National Policy Committee, a group of advisors appointed by his predecessor. The policy called for high protective tariffs on manufactured goods in order to foster industrialization within Canada. Macdonald continued this policy during his second term in office, imposing tariffs of 50% or more on manufactured goods. This move had the desired effect of promoting industrialization, but it was controversial. Farmers and other consumers of manufactured goods complained that they were being forced to pay higher prices to support Canadian manufacturers. Nevertheless, the policy remained in place until 1891. In his later years, Macdonald's health began to fail him. In 1887, he suffered a slight stroke, and in 1891, while recovering from another stroke, he presided over the last major corruption scandal to hit the Macdonald government. The charges were eventually dropped, but the scandal weakened the government and allowed the Liberals to win the next election. Macdonald died on June 6, 1891, at the age of 76. He is buried in Cataraqui Cemetery in Kingston, Ontario. Personal life. Macdonald was married twice, first to Isabella Clark, with whom he had 3 children, including future Prime Minister Hugh John Macdonald. After her death in 1857, he married Agnes Bernard in 1867. Legacy. Sir John A. Macdonald is a controversial figure in Canadian history. Some view him as a hero who united the country and oversaw its growth into a major power. Others see him as a tyrant who oppressed the French Canadians and ruined the prospects of the Indigenous peoples. Macdonald's policies toward the Indigenous peoples were indeed disastrous. In his view, they stood in the way of progress, and he tried everything he could to get rid of them. In 1876, Macdonald's government passed the Gradual Civilization Act, which forced Indigenous children to abandon their cultures and assimilate to European standards. More than 150,000 children were removed from their homes and forced to attend residential schools run by churches. There, they were forbidden to speak their native languages or practice their religions. Many of the children died at the schools, and those who survived were forever changed by the experience. The damage done by the residential schools continues to this day. On the other hand, Macdonald was a brilliant politician who helped to shape the modern world. He was the founding father of Canada, the first Prime Minister of a country that stretches from the Atlantic to the Pacific. He oversaw the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway, which connected the country from coast to coast. He promoted the settlement of the West and the development of its natural resources. and he fostered the growth of Canadian industry through a policy of high tariffs. Love him or hate him, there is no denying that Macdonald was one of the most important figures in Canadian history. I hope you enjoyed this episode with a special thanks to my patrons.